It's just that simple. It doesn't make any difference who the PSA is for or who asks for it. Mr. Love, let me ask you in terms of your additional comments.
Your Honor, I think those are very astute comments. I think they accurately summarize the legal issue before you. I want to agree and encourage you, this is not a political issue, it's not a partisan issue. It's about the rule of law.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's going to cut. It cuts both ways. And I would also, and I interrupt you, but I mean, let me ask you, if let's assume, under the worst case scenario, which I can imagine, since this tribunal is asked to make a decision of law in this case, as to whether this governor violated the law or didn't violate the law, I mean, if the tribunal makes a mistake, the legislature will be back in session and they can amend the law to correct that mistake. I mean, I'm not saying that, you know, this tribunal ought to be slipshod in which conclusion of law it accepts. But the fact of the matter is, this is not something for all times. The legislature will be back in session, and if the legislature thinks that the tribunal made a mistake, it seems to me like they can correct it.
Your Honor, I think you're exactly right. If they meant to limit this to merely the purchase of PSAs, they can come back and add those words to the statute. It's not your job to do that.
One way, either way. I mean, if it's interpreted in favor of the governor, or if it's interpreted in favor of the Republican Party, the legislature can certainly come back, and they will be coming back. How many more days is it until they return?
Don't make me think about it, please.
But it will be short. So if this is, I mean, in my mind, this isn't the most fundamental, you know, big issue of our time by any means. The legislature will be back, and if the legislature thinks that this tribunal made a mistake in its conclusion of law, boy, the legislature can fix it. And even if they agree with this tribunal's conclusion of law, maybe they'll make it a little bit more apparent. So, while I'm very aware that the parties want the correct answer, and you can believe I will give all my time and attention in coming up with what I believe is the correct answer, I must admit that if I get it wrong, it's going to impact this governor. In the short run, we've already heard from the Governor's Council that the governor's ceased running these PSAs anyway. But the legislature can fix it. That's what the legislature's for. So I'll try to get it right. I plan to get it right. But if I don't make you happy, take your argument to the legislature next time they're here in this building and have them correct it. But let me ask Mr. Lovell, do you have any further comments?
I just have two in closing, Your Honor. I have the utmost confidence in your deliberation, your skill set to do this. If you're worried about correcting from either side, we also have the court system to appeal the decision.
Exactly. My decision,
it's okay.
I want everybody to know how I recognize how fragile any decision I make is. And for those of you who may not know, I make a proposed decision to the commissioner. The commissioner can either accept or reject or modify my decision. Then, whatever decision the commissioner makes can be appealed to the Montana District Court, and that appeal, I assume, would be right here in Helena. So it would go to one of the district court judges in Helena to see whether the district court judge thinks the commissioner got it right. And then an appeal could be taken to the Montana Supreme Court on whether the district court got it right. I hope that we won't belabor the judicial system and the taxpayers of the state of Montana in any appeals, but that's the right of parties, and that's apart from anything that I say or do in making a decision. But I realize that my decision, quite frankly, is most fragile. But I suspect the legislature will be back in session and have an opportunity to consider this matter before this case could eventually wind its way to the Montana Supreme Court. But that's only an assumption on my part.
Your Honor, my first comment in closing is I'm sure that your decision will be on solid bedrock, and so would the commissioner, so long as you apply the plain language of ordinary meaning of the statute, just as we've argued on that point. You get a flavor. I'm not going to go here, but like the old fire horse, when the fire bell rings, I run out of the...
Right.
You understand the tempest in the teapot over the facts here was created by the argument that the Governor's Council again raised in trying to sit down. We agree that the facts are plain, but you've got to consider the slippery slope and the parade of horribles. I'm rebutting those. If we get rid of those, we're okay.
Right.
I do have one last comment, though. In addition to the plain language of the statute, which refers to very common advertisements, there's no ambiguity there.
Right.
And public service announcements, I don't think there's any ambiguity there.
And it doesn't say anything about opt-in.
It does not say, it does not say how or what manner of use of state funds is authorized. It's a flat, complete prohibition on state funds for such PSAs. And there was some expression of offense and bristling and so on, but I think the taxpayers ought to be allowed to decide for themselves whether they think it's a good thing for their taxpayer money to be spent on those salaries and on that equipment and on those resources. It did cost way more than a red cent, and taxpayers funded it, and Joe Trapelia introduced this bill to stop it. And I'm urging you to give effect to the legislature's clear, overarching intent. And I thank you for your attention today.
Okay, thank you. I realize that the council could argue this case until tomorrow this time. But let me just ask council for the governor, do you have any additional remarks?
Oh, Your Honor, I could go on for the next couple of hours, as you noted, but I think you've heard everything. I think you seem to have a fair grasp of both the issues legally and factually, and I don't think I can add any further light on the subject.
Thank you. Mr. Lovell?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel, for your enlightened statements this morning, your arguments, your citations of authority. I am very happy that we held this hearing today because I think we've got this case narrowed down to where the tribunal can look at this case as a very simple fact situation. The governor produced and thereafter distributed a PSA announcement that was run on some Montana radio stations, and the only question is whether or not that was a violation of the law that this complaint is brought under. That's a simple legal conclusion. I think that I've heard plenty of arguments from counsel in terms of how they believe that law should be interpreted. I will take those arguments under advisement, and it would be at this point my intent to issue a decision summarizing those simple facts and making a proposed decision to the commissioner on what I think is the proper interpretation of the law. Thank you very much for your attendance. I'll close the hearing at this point.